folks, and welcome to F1 TV Tech Talk on this, the penultimate day of pre-season testing here in Barcelona at the Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya. I'm Will Buxton, this is Sam Collins.
Hello.
And Sam, with 1.5 days left, what do we still have? What do the teams still have to learn?
Loads! Absolutely loads. They are running out of time. It's a bit like that scene in Apocalypse Now, where you've got Colonel Kilgore saying, someday this test has got to end. All the engineers up and down are loving the testing. Well, those for whom it is going well, not everybody. But they need to get setups done. They need to do race simulations. They need to run out of fuel like we were talking about yesterday. Yeah. There's so many little bits and pieces they've got to do still, and they haven't got enough time left to do it. 4 days, 2 lots of 4 days is never enough. It used to be 3 lots of 4 days, and even that wasn't enough before we get to free practice 1 in Melbourne.
Loving the pop culture references. We are halfway through the day. We're going to go through the morning times in a little bit, but let's look at yesterday first. It was Carlos Sainz who topped the morning session, who ended up topping the day on a 1:17.1. Joint top number of laps as well, 130. All in, a pretty good day for McLaren. Very good day for McLaren. If you compare it to this time last year, McLaren were absolutely in a terrible position. They couldn't get the laps in. Their new Renault engine, which they thought was going to save them, it didn't integrate well into last year's car. This year, the car looks better, it looks more developed. It just looks like McLaren are going to be a really credible team again. The interesting thing, though, is that after week 1, we were looking at McLaren saying short run pace, low fuel runs, they're looking good. Race sims, not so much, and we were expecting them to be off the pace. They've actually seemingly lifted their game into this week, and as you say, are looking like a decent upper midfield contender. It could be a lot to do with the temperature. This week's got a lot hotter than anybody expected. The cars are also faster than Pirelli expected, as we found out a couple of days ago. I think McLaren are coming into the sweet spot, but it could be the car's oversensitive. It's a very complex car, and that could give the temperature variation a real factor, because you have the operational window, we like to call it as engineers, and if you drop out of it, your car's terrible, but if you're in that sweet spot, the car is going to be quick, so keep an eye on it in Melbourne. Racing Point having a better week as well. First 2 days of the test up in the top echelons of the timing sheet. Perez a 1:17.842, and still, as we heard yesterday, not really their 2019 car. Yeah, they said they're going to bring some very exotic things to Melbourne, and I don't know if that's what they're going to be eating in the motorhome. Well, they are the only team that have cans of Lilt in their motorhome, so maybe hoping for more than that from the exotic front. Vettel the team didn't get the car out until the last 5-10 minutes of the day after that crash at lunchtime, which we believe now is a front left suspension failure. Well, no, we've heard a little bit more information from Ferrari on this. So we've heard it was a rim failure, so it was a FOD, foreign object damage. So if in the aviation industry, a little bit of something, a grit, bit of damage, hit the rim of the car, cracked it, and that caused it to fail. Okay, interesting, but they're definitely talking about the front rims, because they were trialling the Mercedes-esque rear rims,
they were running new rims, so it could be something to do that. So a lot of the teams are using different wheels. When I say rims, it means wheels to everybody else. The shiny bit in the middle of the tyre. Not the tyre, it's the wheel itself. Yeah. Now, a lot of teams are using special designs of wheels, which with a lot of strafes and lumps and bumps. Some of it's to do with getting air out through the brake disc, but a lot of it's to do with actually getting heat into the rim and into the tyre and helping them warm up those tyres. Right. And with those different tyre temperatures we spoke about on the first day, this 80 degrees starting temperature in the tyre blankets, could be something to do with that. I still don't think it was the rim, though. I think it was a suspension failure. Interesting. I stand corrected on the suspension issues, and my apologies for that. Raikkonen P4, another good day, 18.2 for Alfa Romeo. Grosjean pumping in the laps, 18.3. Verstappen, 18.3, small gearbox issue for Red Bull yesterday. Yeah, and that's interesting, because if Red Bull are running into little gearbox worries, expect Toro Rosso to have exactly the same worries, because the rear ends of those exactly identical. New thing for Toro Rosso. First car to come out of Faenza ever, as far as I'm aware, that didn't have its own bespoke gearbox. Fascinating. Talking about Faenza, Fiat 18.6 in P7, then Bottas 18.9. Mercedes still running that very different W10. I was speaking to one of their main competitors this morning who said they believe Mercedes could be developing or experimenting with 2 completely different design approaches, perhaps track dependent in 2019. Do we really believe that Mercedes have it within them to develop 2 cars in 2019, or am I being sold a pup? I don't know. I mean, it would be extremely complicated and extremely difficult to make that work, but it has been done before. I think it was in 1998 or 1999. Ferrari did it with 2 different wheelbases of car, which is a fundamentally different project. Yes. And on some circuits they ran the short wheelbase, on other circuits they ran the long wheelbase. If Mercedes is doing that, they could really be pulling a blinder on the entire field. But the cost and time involved, and with the wind tunnel restrictions, the CFD restrictions, it's a hugely brave step to do that.
As this person was saying this morning, Mercedes don't do anything for no reason, and the thought that they brought a safe car to week one, that they'd finished, as apparently they've been telling the press, as we've seen written up over the last 24 hours, a safe car that was finished in November, and then a more complex one that they've been working on up to last week, to week two. Do we buy that?
No. If they finish this car in November, it means in January or early February there was a completely different car, and what they're working on now for Melbourne is different again, because these guys, Mercedes is probably the biggest team in Formula One. They're extremely efficient. They've got great facilities. Yeah, you can never rule them out, but it still doesn't look quite right for them, does it?
No, and again, the length and breadth of this pit lane, nobody thinks we've seen properly what Mercedes have got to offer in 2019. They're playing with something, just can't quite figure out what. Now, day 3. We've seen the first 1:16s on the board. Alex Albon was the first into the 1:16, but pipped just before lunch by Charles Leclerc, 1:16.361. He's got the full day in the car today because he missed out on the afternoon yesterday. Seb Vettel will be in for the final day of the test, full final day of the test tomorrow.
Ferrari still seem to me to be the team to be. They haven't made a massive external concept change to the car. Look at the roll hoop, very different to what they did last year. Tells me that they've done something completely different with the cooling system, and I think they found something in that car. It's been reliable, it's been quick, the drivers seem to like it, and watching it out on track, it seems to work really well. I think they're leading the pack at the moment.
Yeah, that certainly seems to be the prevailing opinion. Ferrari have got the jump on everybody, and they all know that come Australia, they will be the team to beat. It's just a matter of how big that gap is between Ferrari and everyone else.
Yeah, and I think that gap, it's very hard to predict. Melbourne is a funny track anyway because it's a street circuit, it's not often used, it's dusty, it's a weird layout, it's bumpy. I don't think we're actually going to get a clear picture of this until round 3 because the tracks we're going to at the beginning, just a little bit unpredictable, they create strange effects and very strange results. I couldn't judge where they're going to be, but I do think Ferrari will be in front of the pack in all of those places.
It's funny, isn't it? We can't ever read too much into the times or pre-season testing or anything else, but it's the body language. It's what the drivers think, it's what they feel. I had a little chat with Leclerc yesterday. I said, how is it? He said, it's good. I said, how good? He said, it's really bleeping good.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And he just had this massive, massive smile on his face. Now, to move on, because we want to keep it moving. Yesterday, we spoke about that cavity between the front wheel and the side pod, and we didn't get to talk about a part that I know is, I think, your biggest area of interest for this year. We were thinking, what should we talk about on the 3rd day? Because we're going to do any other business tomorrow. Should we talk about the rear wings? And you said, actually, there's a part of the car I think is even more important than the rear wing, and it's the wing mirror. Tell us why.
It is. No, so you think about wing mirrors, all about the drivers seeing behind them and making sure they don't Max Verstappen it into somebody else.
We all know they don't.
Because they don't use them. The wing mirrors are... The rules on the wing mirrors changed last year after Ferrari came up with some rather interesting...
The dangleberries.
The dangleberries, if you want to call them that. Wing mirrors that weren't really for looking behind you. They were aerodynamic parts. Now, the FIA didn't really like that, but it was... And they changed them around a little bit. Renault came up with some solutions. But Ferrari came up with something really interesting, which they kept all the way through the season. They found a technical paper by a student in California from a couple of years ago that found a way to vent air through the wing mirror housing and reduce the drag they create. And it's meant to be a massive, massive drag reduction. So on the Delta Wing Le Mans car, removing wing mirrors on that car was a 5% drag reduction, which in Formula 1 terms is utterly enormous. Now, a number of teams copied that concept through last year. The FIA thought, it's getting a bit out of control with these wing mirrors, the teams shouldn't be developing this much, so they wrote a whole new section of the rule book, very detailed, very complicated, and said, look, you've got a wing mirror, it's the look behind you, that's about it, and you can have 2 supports on it, nothing complicated, nothing exotic, and went away. As we heard from Ross Brawn, he was a little bit taken aback by some of the solutions that arrived here in Barcelona.
Formula 1 designers, having ingenuity, who'd have thought of it?
Exactly.
And that old adage, the ancient adage that exists in Formula 1, you cannot unlearn what you have learned. They will always search for a way to bring back what they've been forbidden from running.
Exactly, and the wing mirrors have now become a massive aerodynamic area of development. Every single team is going in different directions. I've been told there's a lot more we're going to see in Melbourne as well.
Should we go through them team by team? Mercedes, what they've brought this week, interestingly, of course, they have to be held at 2 points now.
Not necessarily. No, they don't have to be. You can have 1 point, but everybody's gone for 2 because 2 means you can do more of the aerodynamic parts.
So talk us through Mercedes.
Well, this is the Mercedes version 1, where you have the mirror support, the mirror housing itself, which is quite conventional, held by the 2 supports. But it's quite obvious looking at the image there that those supports are there to condition the flow over and around the side pod and nothing to do with supporting the wing mirror.
And version 2?
Very much similar, but they're mucking around like the rest of the side pod, changing it around.
How about Ferrari?
Very interesting, Ferrari. Ferrari have not bought their drag-reducing wing mirrors I was just talking about on this car, and the solution on their wing mirrors is very, very basic, and I don't think that's their final solution. I think there's more to come there.
So they're not showing their full hands.
Exactly.
Red Bull, lots going on.
Red Bull have got the drag-reducing wing mirrors I was talking about before. So
essentially, it's
a hole.
So essentially, is it a box around the mirror?
So
is that the easiest way of
describing it? If you think about the wing mirror on your car at home, you've got the bit with the glass in, then around it you've got a big plastic sort of coving. What Ferrari came up with, now Red Bull are running, is they've opened up a hole in the back of that coving with a little aerodynamic winglet inside it, and then they've put slots around the outside of the mirror glass, which brings the air through and just reduces the drag. It's clever, simple, basic aerodynamics. It's really good.
Fascinating. Renault,
another team that are looking like quite a simple solution. I think there's more to come. Very similar to the Mercedes, twin supports, integrated with the leading edge of the side pod. I think there's a lot more to come. Very widely spread.
Are you surprised at the simplicity of the Renault this year? As we said, there's no S-duct, the simplicity of the wing mirrors.
It's very much an evolutionary car. A lot of the concepts have carried over on the Renault, but I think we're going to find more about that in a little while.
We will do. The Haas,
again, like the Renault and the Mercedes, very simple, twin support, conventional mirror housing. Watch that to change, though. I know that one's changing.
When we're talking about twin supports, we're talking about one strut very often coming in from the side, one from the base. Again, an example here with the McLaren.
The McLaren is a great example of that. So you are allowed, within the regulations, you're allowed to attach the wing mirror to the side pod bodywork and or the monocoque, and that's it. That's the only, the regulations are very clear on what it can be attached to. What the regulations kind of didn't notice is what shape the attachment was.
Okay. Racing Point, this one, unique in as much as both struts are coming from underneath.
And that's interesting because I wasn't sure that was legal. But this is another area that the teams seem to have found a lot of holes in the regulations where there didn't seem to be any holes at all. So I think the Racing Point solution is very interim, and Andy Green has told us that he's bringing something special there. Toro Rosso we're looking at there as well. Now that is very much an evolution of the Red Bull concept, and I wonder if Red Bull have shared that. They're not allowed to share aerodynamic parts between the two teams.
Exactly.
But it's a very similar concept, and they did have those drag-reducing mirrors last year as well.
And then Alfa.
Alfa is an interesting one. So they've got very large, big, bulbous mirror housings that are quite simple compared to some of the other solutions. Rather than using it to reduce drag, you'll see those little eyes on it, those little dots.
Yeah.
Those are thermal imagers, so they're heat-sensing cameras, so they can watch the front tyre temperatures.
We think just for testing?
No, I think they're going to run those all year long.
Fascinating.
So it's crucial information. However, I've been told mounting them in that location is really vulnerable because lots of grit and dirt off the front tyre destroys the lenses after a few laps.
Interessant. And then finally, now this I think is a car we're going to have a bit more of a chat about tomorrow in our regular business. But that wing mirror treatment on the Williams looks quite interesting to me.
The Williams, because I haven't had a close look at the car because it wasn't here for the first 2 days when I was looking really detailed at the cars. It's completely different to what anybody else has done. The support goes over the top, the upper support goes over the top and hangs down to the mirror. But the mirror seems very flat, almost like something you'd find on a very cheap sort of Peugeot 205 from the 1980s. Very flat.
Good car, that.
I had a Golf. Very flat, not very shaped, but it looks like they're using it to play with the aero very much around the front of that side pod duct again. But they've got a completely different route to everybody else, so I wonder if they found something there.
Fascinating stuff. And as we said, tomorrow is going to be any other business. And with that, it's great to welcome in Nick Chester. How's it gone? We are 6 days in. Well, 6.5 days in. Not long to go.
Yeah, not bad actually. You know, we've had a pretty packed program. We've had a lot of stuff on the test list, and it's always hard to get through everything. But actually, we have covered a lot of things on the test list. We've got some really good answers. We built a lot of mileage, so we're getting good confidence in the reliability of the car.
It's looking incredibly tight this year. I mean, there seems to be an Italian red thing that is going quite well, but everybody else seems to be in a big lump in the middle. I mean, how are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you look last week and the order was quite different to this week, but everybody's pretty close. So it's pretty hard making predictions at the moment. I think we'll have a better idea probably by the end of tomorrow when everybody's quali runned and everyone's, been pretty much on low fuel. But it does look fairly tight.
I was just thinking, because your power unit is in the back of another car as well, the McLaren. Does that give you a pressure to directly compare your chassis against the one from Woking as well?
Yes, it's a bit more of a, I suppose, easy comparison. But in the end, we're sort of fighting against everybody, so we're looking at what everybody's doing and trying to make our car as quick as we can.
Right now, the McLaren seems super quick though, and maybe not so quick, but we shouldn't be reading anything into that, should we?
I think it's still tricky because there's teams running different fuel loads, so it's still fairly hard to pull apart. But like I say, maybe by the end of day 4, when everybody's run low fuel, we'll have a fairly good idea.
What I'd really like to know is, during launch season, when the renders of the cars come out or the launch cars are displayed for the first time, how much attention do you pay to them? Do they give you any clues as to what we are actually going to see when you get here for the first week of testing, or is it all about that first run out, your spy photographers down the end of the pit lane snapping away, sending all the images back, and is there then a flurry of activity of, oh goodness, look what X is running, goodness me, look what Y is running? Did we think about that? Did we run through those concepts?
Yeah, I think we do pay more notice to on-track photos or sort of in the garage photos. Often what you see at launch can be a sort of digital image. Yeah. It's not always quite what the real car is.
For the sponsors.
Yeah, I mean it's good and you need to present it, but you get a much better idea when you get real photos of the track and you can start understanding what the other teams are doing.
What were you most intrigued by then when you saw these things in the flesh for the first time and started poring over all of those images?
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting things. Front wings obviously are a big item. There's some very different solutions with different objectives. So it's interesting understanding what the other teams are doing. There's a few things that I'm sure we'd like to try and the other teams would like to try as well. So front wings is a big one. But then going further back, the front drums and the barge board systems and sidepod vane systems, there's a lot in there as well. So there's a lot of interesting details right the way across the grid.
And we've been touching on it today, but the wing mirrors seems to be an area that a lot of development's gone on over the winter.
Yeah, wing mirrors are quite different. I mean, the regs have changed a lot, so we work in a different bodywork box. And in fact, they're not classed as bodywork now, so there's a different way of using them. Yeah, there's been a fair amount of development in mirrors.
Are we going to see some more coming from you? Because we were just looking at the wing mirrors earlier in this show, and it looks like yours are fairly basic, shall I say, compared to some of the other cars. And I suspect you might have something up your sleeve on that, because you were quite advanced last year on these.
Well, there's sort of all areas all over the place we're working on, mirrors can be one, but there's a lot of other areas that are super interesting too. So, really, it's wherever we get gains. Wherever we get gains, we'll bring those to the track.
Now, yesterday you were running your car around the track with, well, what can only be described as horns on the front of it, this big aluminium horn structure.
I would say it was more like the arrows front wing.
Yeah,
Remember
exactly,
that wing that sprouted out
Monaco
the arrows?
T-wings.
The Monaco, yes.
Can you tell us what that was?
And also it on the rear wing.
Yes,
today.
Exactly, yeah, with this white section. What are you up to? What is that? Because we've never seen this before.
The front wing, it's the aluminium structure was so we could tether it, and that means we can stop it deflecting. All the wings move with speed. That's why we have the legality checks on them. But it's interesting to know what happens if it doesn't deflect or deflects a different amount. So that was the purpose of yesterday's test. And what you see on some cars with the sort of the white paint and dots, it's so you can then put a camera looking at them and you can understand the deflection. So again, it's all sort of deflection measurement.
And obviously deflection is quite strictly limited by the regulations, but that deflection test is static. When the car's out on track, obviously they can't test it because the scrutineers will get run over. So how far can you push that deflection without the FIA getting a bit unhappy? Well,
we're not supposed to use deflection sort of actively for performance. But obviously you can't stop something deflecting. It's going to, you can make it very, very stiff and it'll deflect a bit less, but there's always going to be some there. The main thing is that you design the part properly to pass the tests in the garage.
One thing I want to touch on, which we've spoken about this week already, Red Bull still running their S-duct in the interesting vent box at the top of the nose. You guys seem not to have followed that route. It's something that Daniel became very used to at his time at the car. Is that something he's brought up with you, something he needs, something he demands from the front end of the car?
Not really, no. I mean, we sort of know what Daniel likes from the car, and as all other drivers, he wants a lot of grip, but he particularly wants good rear end stability. So that's the biggest area to work on, but it's not necessarily going to be by developing that area of the S-duct that will give him the rear end stability. I think there's a lot of other areas we'd work in first.
And how's he settling into a car which hasn't been designed around him? It's designed essentially for another driver. He's had to get into it himself and adapt himself and bring those changes to bring it through to what he wants.
Well, he's settled in really well. He's comfortable in the car. He's settled in with the team really well. We've got his sort of driver positions pretty good. So it's really been incredibly easy.
Great.
So now we just need to develop it and make it as quick as we can.
Well, good luck with that. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We will let you get off because we know you're a very busy man. Thank you very much for your
Pleasure.
time. Much appreciated. Thank you so much. Great insight there, I think, into what's going on down at Renault and the promise for the season ahead.
Well, I'm really happy we found out what those horns were.
Yes.
Because that's been bugging me for the last 24 hours, so we got a great answer on that.
Excellent stuff. As we said, penultimate day today. Just 1 day remains of pre-season testing. That is, of course, tomorrow. We're going to cover any other business, all the intricate flicks, wings, anything that you've seen, I've seen. I'm going to ask you about it. Hopefully you'll have some answers. We'll discuss it before we go on air. I won't just drop you in it. Tomorrow, that's your lot, though, for today, folks. Thanks for following along, and please join us again tomorrow for the last in this week's pre-season F1 TV